Hi everyone, this is our introduction to the alerts feature, and this is what I'm calling the anatomy of an alert. So within REDCap, the alerts allow you to send automated messages out from REDCap based on what happens to your records within your project. It supports coordination within teams. It's helpful for communication with participants and other stakeholders. And what we're looking at today are the 6 basic elements that are essential to every alert. So to access the alerts feature, you will go to this alerts and notifications link within your REDCap project, and this is where you're able to build alerts. And you can see here that we've got a fair amount of space to specify the different scenarios that we want our alerts to operate in. So every alert is going to require 6 elements. You've got to have trigger logic. You're going to have to tell REDCap when to send the alert, which email to send the alert from, who to send the alert to, and then you've got your subject and body, so what you want the alert to say. So breaking it down, the first step is the trigger logic. And the key question to ask here is what situation should cause the alert to be sent? So there can be fairly simple ones where I say, okay, whenever people have completed their demographics survey, I want this alert to go out. And that can be done with the record saved on a specific form survey option, but you can also do conditional logic and even time-based logic. So I can say, okay, I want this alert to go out if people, have said that they like strawberry ice cream the best. That's, I can send that alert only to the people who have said strawberry ice cream, and they would receive that alert after they had put in that they like strawberry ice cream the best. Time-based logic, you can compare the value of a date field to today or a standard date. So I could say, if it's been 5 weeks since they signed consent, then I want them to get this alert. So I can make the conditional logic and time-based logic very simple. I can make them very complicated. This is where you have a ton of granularity to control who gets this alert and in what situation. The other fun thing about this section is the trigger limit. So the default is to say, okay, only once per record, we will never re-trigger this alert. So that would be like, after they've signed consent, I only want to send them their demographics survey once. But I can also change it, right? I could have an alert that goes out every time a form is saved. I could have an alert that goes out once per event. So I could say, okay, under each event, anytime that someone completes their preferred ice cream survey, I want to send their preferred cake survey for that specific event. And I can also do once per repeat instance. So this is one that I use a lot with adverse events, where I use a repeating form for adverse events. And then whenever certain information has been entered on the adverse event form, I want to send a new alert for that particular adverse event. The interesting thing to understand about trigger logic is that in order for a record to get triggered, for an alert to be sent for a certain record, the trigger logic must become true for that record after I've already built my alert. And, if you're building, from the very beginning of a project, this might not become as relevant, but when you're doing test records in your project and trying to make sure that you can test your alerts, or if you're adding alerts into a project that already has some data collected, it's really important to think about that stipulation, that the logic must become true after I've built the alert in order for a record to have that alert go out. And here's my little visual of how I think of it. So I think about trigger logic like it's a floor trap in a little action adventure movie, where I'm trying to get my adventurer to step on the trigger for my floor trap so that the boulder gets released. And in order for that to happen, I have to lay down my little floor trap before my adventurer has passed that part of the room. So you can see here, I've got a record with data recorded up through visit 2, but nothing for visit 3. And my alert logic is tied to something in visit 3, right? This is checking, at visit 3, did we report that this person has measles? And in this scenario, this person is at visit 2, they haven't reached visit 3 yet. So if I build this visit 3 based alert, and then I let time go by, then they complete their visit 3, my adventurer steps on the little trigger, or my alert gets triggered. And so we release the boulder in our adventure movie case, or in our red cap case, the alert goes out. But there can also be situations where the alert wouldn't be sent. So if I build that same alert that visit 3 has measles equals 1, saying that they reported having measles at visit 3. And if my adventurer is already past that point, if I've laid down this trigger behind them, then I'm not going to release my boulder because they never step on my trigger. So this person who has measles 1 recorded under visit 3, and then I build that visit 3 has measles trigger, they're already past the trigger, so they won't step on this. The alert won't be set for this record. If I have, another record coming through that completes visit 3 after that and has measles marked as 1, they will get the alert, but not this participant who already had visit 3 completed. Another fun part of your control over alerts is the timing. So the key question here is, when should the alert be sent? And a lot of the time, especially within communication within teams, it's very convenient to just send it immediately. But you also can send it at different time points. So I can schedule it based on when the trigger condition was met. So I could send it, the next day at 9 a.m. I could send it, 10 hours after the alert gets triggered. I can also reference another date field in my project here. So I can say, maybe I want to send this alert 20 days after their first visit. If I record the date of that first visit, I can use that as the timing trigger, or I can use that as the timing reference point for an alert. And I can set my alert to go out 20 days after that visit date. And then you also do have the option to send things at a single send date. So this might be one that, if I'm using this project to track people's CVs or their yearly documentation updates, right? That's where I might be like, okay, I add all these people. I want everyone to get this alert on September 1st, because that's when I want them to start looking at their annual training. So the sender question is, who should the alert come from? And the trick with the sender, and the rules about the sender address, you have to pick just one email address. We can't send it from 3 different ones. It needs to be a single email address. And the email has to be associated with the profile of a REDCap user who is a user on this project. So if I haven't added someone as a user to my project yet, I can't send alerts from their email. However, the email does not have to be the same as the person who's building the alert. So I can build an alert, but have the alert actually come from my PI, even though they did not, enter the data, they did not do the REDCap build. I can choose to have it come from that email. REDCap also allows you to add secondary and tertiary emails. And what this gets really useful for, at least within the context of alerts, is that a secondary email will also appear in that option dropdown. So my default option when I'm building an alert is caitlin.hoffman@jefferson.edu, but I can change that. This redcap@jefferson.edu will also show up in my dropdown list because it's my secondary email, and I can send from that one. And so that allows us to take shared inboxes and use them as senders, so that if somebody replies back to an alert, that email goes to our shared inbox and someone with the team can follow up on them. So that's I think one of the big things to consider with the sender is, especially if you're sending out to participants, you want to have a sender that will be recognizable to them in some way or make sense in some way. And then you also want to make sure that if people decide to reply to that email, ideally you want that reply to go to someone who's going to be able to answer their questions. And maybe that's a shared inbox, maybe it's a single person's email. And then we have the recipient section. And you can add as many recipients as you want. You can enter things manually, you can rely on fields, you can select project users out of a dropdown. But there are two main situations that I class the recipient thing into. So the first situation is that you're going to have different addresses for different records. So this is what happens if you're sending communications to participants in a study. Each record is a participant. Each record will have its own email address. So what I want to do here is make an email field in my project. Each person fills it out with their email. And then when we meet the alert conditions, that email will go out. Brief caveat with this. Thinking of things in terms of workflow, in terms of how I'm building my REDCap forms, if I'm going to rely on people entering their email address in a record in order to know which email to direct that record to, I want to make sure that that email gets entered before the alert triggers. So if my trigger condition happens and I don't have an email address field, REDCap's going to still treat it as triggered, but it's not going to actually send anywhere. So I need to make sure that my email address within my workflow gets completed first, and then I can send out alerts to my study participants or to different people based on different records. You can also have a scenario where you're going to use the constant email across all records. And again, it could be one constant email, it could be 10 constant emails, but if the same person is supposed to receive this alert every time, like maybe it's a principal investigator on a study, or maybe I'm doing an operational support project and I want a certain group of people to get this notification every time something happens. This is where I would enter the email addresses directly into the alert. So I can pick my project users out of that dropdown, just like I can pick an email field. And then I also have space down at the bottom here to manually enter emails. So I can send an alert out to people who aren't part of the project. I don't have to give people access to my project in order to send them information based on what happens in my project. And then with the subject and body section, our key question is, what should the alert say? And this is really where you build your email the way that you want your participants to receive it, the way that you want things to be seen. So the message section has a rich text editor. And so that means that you've got an interface very similar to something like Word so that you can aesthetically customize your email. You also have two options down here at the bottom, the purple typing button and the green smart variable button. Those will take you to a list of instructions about two fairly valuable tricks that you can put in here. So piping will let you pull the value of a field into the alert. So if I want to send the alert with a little greeting that references the person who the record is about, or if I want to include their upcoming appointment date, I can use piping to pull the value of a field from that record into the alert. And so everyone will get, an alert that's customized to them, but always follows that same structure. The smart variables allow you to generate some direct links to specific forms. So I might use this to send survey links. I also might use it within my team to send links to forms that I need a team member to go take a look at, like especially if I'm sending something for investigator review. I try to give them a direct link to the form I want them to review because that reduces the friction for them, and that's generally helpful in getting this done. And then you also have the option on the left here. So REDCap will default to not having identifier fields pipe in, so like the person's name, right? If that's marked as an identifier field, REDCap's default is not to allow that. So it's worth checking, rereading the email before you save the alert and going, okay, am I trying to pipe identifier fields in here? And is it a problem if I do? So you can make the decision of whether to toggle that on or off. There's also an optional feature on the alerts. So you can build an alert without doing this. All the other ones you have to put something. But you have the option of adding an attachment. So the question here is whether there's a document that should be included. So you can have a file upload field. So I can select out of that dropdown one of the file upload fields in my project. So that allows me to do unique attachments for each record. So let's say I wanted to send a copy of each person's survey responses to someone. I can do that with that file upload field trick. In order to use that, though, I have to build that upload type field. So I have to build a field that's going to capture this upload before I can pick that field out of my dropdown. And then in terms of the flow of my project, I want to make sure that the file gets uploaded before my alert gets triggered. Because again, if there's nothing in the upload field and I trigger the alert is actually still going to go out and it's not going to have that file attached to it. So very frequently, if I'm attaching a file this way, I will add into my trigger logic that I want that file upload field to not be blank. That is something that I do a fair amount. And that way, if people, forget to attach the file at first, the alert doesn't go out until they've gotten that file in there. And then if I have the same file that I want to be sent out for all my records, like an investigational product brochure or something like that, that's when I use that choose file feature. So I just pick that file off of my computer and I say, all right, every time this alert goes out, I want people to get that brochure. And so finally, I do have a few tips for working with alerts. The biggest one is to test them. Test every single alert in the project. It's so easy to make a small mistake somewhere and not realize it until you're a year or two into the project and you've already got someone's alerts derailing. So I make sure to build out my alerts, test them, and some of them are going to be time-based. So what I do is I figure out, okay, what date do I need to enter? This is the one time I allow myself to backdate is during testing. What date do I need to enter so that this alert should go out tomorrow? And then I wait and see if I get the alert tomorrow. And that allows me to test that logic is working without having to wait a full year to see if my 1 year out alert is going to work. I mentioned this a little bit throughout, but to consider workflows when building the alerts. Alerts have an interesting relationship with workflows because you are automating a part of, people's workflow. So alerts can do a lot to reinforce things. If people need to enter a particular piece of data in order to trigger an alert, that can create an incentive to enter that data. But at the same time, the alerts do need to be realistic to people's day-to-day workflow. So I will very frequently, put a little information at the end of one visit form about, hey, what's the date of their next visit? Because I've found that I get more people entering that next visit date and allowing me to send that next visit alert, because I can't send a next visit date alert without having the information of when their next visit is. I find that it's easier to get people to enter that if it's in a form that they're already filling out for this visit versus something where they have to go into a completely separate visit. But that's part of thinking through workflows, and there are many ways that you can support that. The next tip is to always consider non-ideal situations. So what happens if someone misses a visit? What happens if someone misses an assessment? Do I want the alert to still go out if someone missed this visit, or do I not? So that's something important to consider, as I'm choosing which fields to pull into my trigger logic, which fields to use as my date reference, which fields and forms do I want to make the alert rest on versus which ones can I send it with or without. And the last one is it's okay to have multiple alerts. If I have too many logic steps in one trigger, especially if I build it, this whole trigger with 5 or 6 logic steps from the beginning, and my alert doesn't send properly, it's harder for me to tell which piece is the problem. So what I sometimes do is I'll take, a fairly complex trigger situation, and during testing, I'll split it into a few different triggers so that they're easier to test. And then I can combine them once I know all the pieces are working. And I can also have multiple alerts that act as alternatives to each other or send to different people. I might have a different alert for people who are enrolled as adult patients versus people who are enrolled as pediatric patients. It's okay to have those two alerts look different and build in, the clarification of whether this is an adult patient or a pediatric patient into the alert logic so that adults get the adult one, kids get the kid one. Totally, absolutely fine to do and can save me a lot of headaches in the long run. All right. Thank you for joining me and good luck with your future alerts.